Hello, welcome everyone. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining us. There's Beth. Hi, Beth. Love the video of the new shop. Thank you for sharing that with me. That's awesome. Thanks for being here. We are back at it again. We have Greg Robidoux, Executive Director of the Serrata International Cycling Institute, and special guest Ted Ernst, over 80 years in the bicycle industry, including 45 years as a retailer, owning Ted Ernst Bikes in Manhattan Beach, California, is our guest expert joining us today. And super excited to get into the conversation. So nice to see both of you again and have our retailers joining us. And the conversation today is around introduction to fitting. So we're going to dive deep into the basic equipment needed, what offering fit could do for your store, your bottom line, your prestige, and just your customer and community environment. As we go along, feel free to use the chat function to ask questions. You can also, there's a way to, put your hand up, that function. If you really want to blurt something out, we are all friends here, so just unmute yourself and you can go ahead and do that. But we'll just jump in. I just want to, before we get to Ted, I always like to start with Greg. Greg has been doing these events with us for the past couple of months, and I always like to put him on the spot and say, Greg, in the fit world, anything new, anything that you're keen to, you've come across in the last month that you want to share with us around fitting and the topic in general?
Yeah. Can everyone hear me? Because I'm a little glitchy on my screen today. So if somebody wave me down if I'm starting to fuzz out or something. But I was thinking a lot about this week prior to our conversation, and probably one of the bigger news things since we last met was our friends at Specialized deciding to go to having a consumer direct model. For me, it reemphasizes the need for for really a top-down and a bottom-up approach to bike fit, meaning that we need our reps, we need our bicycle manufacturers really kind of instilling in people that are looking to buy bikes how important fit is with regards to what your experience on riding a bike is going to be like. Especially as the direct-to-consumer model gains more and more traction, people need to understand what they're getting into. People need to get to the point where the consumer is the one saying like, hey, if I'm going to buy a bike, I need to get it fit to me. And currently, we've got wonderful people like we have in this meeting today, all yelling from the rooftops saying how important fit is. But we need to get to the point where our consumers are the ones that are saying this is something that needs to happen. And if you believe the statistics at this point, less than 10% of people actually get their bikes fit. So, I would love to see, even a brand like Specialized that really pushes the idea of fit, or at least they do internally, with their acquisition of Retool and their fit school, you don't hear them saying to their customers, hey, before you buy a bike, make sure you get it, make sure you know what your body needs, make sure you get a bike fit so that you have the best possible experience on the equipment that we can provide. And my thought and something that I want to work towards in 2022 is making sure that maybe more of our manufacturers are getting to the point of saying like, hey, this is an important part of the process. It's not just go to your local bike shop or go online and buy a bike. It's like, let's make sure that this bike is going to work for your body. And I understand that can still be challenging with the supply chain issues that are going out there, but I think all the more reason why you want something that's going to work for you. And so, that's my 2 cents for this week. And I'd love to hear, after Ted, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on the matter, what people think about, big moves in the industry as far as consumer direct sales. I'm sure that's very polarizing and people have a lot of opinions. But I'm interested to see how people think it will affect them on the positive side or on the negative side.
Thank you so much, Greg. You were breaking up a little bit there, but your point is spot on and definitely timely and relevant. And I'd love to as well hear some conversation around this. So we'll definitely leave time at the end for that. But I know Ted, back with us again, second time, and let's have the presentation. We'll turn it over to Ted now. Take us through fitting in your multiple years of experience.
Okay, thanks. That was really good, Greg. And thank you, Heather. So we'll get ourselves moving here. First of all, you got to have a customer, and you start with the customer, and you get him in and you let him know what you're going to do when you're going to get a fitting. So it's kind of a friendly situation. And important is that you have his name and phone number, or the lady, you get their phone numbers and your contact point, and you have a spec sheet. And the spec sheet has got to have all the different dimensions and the things you end up with on that bicycle, on that position. And so as a result, and as you're working along, you finalize these things for the moment, and then you mark them down. And then, of course, if they come back and you need a little bit of a change after their short riding experience, then, of course, you have that spec sheet. You can cross a few numbers out and put a few new numbers in and keep that current, so that basically if that person ever goes anywhere or gets a different bike someplace else and moves away, they can always refer to that spec sheet and have their position set up the way it is on the spec sheet, and it should fit them reasonably well, regardless of the angles and a position. The bike would be the bicycle is constructed, but your pedal relationship between you and your crank arms and your sprocket are going to be about the same. And then that makes a different handling bike maybe, but you're at least going to have a similar position on the bike. Now, having said that, you've got to tell your customer you have to come with racing attire or riding attire. Basically, they need a nice snug fitting top, and they need a nice good shorts and tights on, so that you can see their bare legs and bare arms and their muscles, the way they react, and short stockings or no stockings, whatever the case may be. So it varies with your client, but you have to see the muscle stress, and you have to see the stretch points, and you have to see where they are as far as their riding muscles and their angles and all that are concerned, or you cannot help them or get them around to where they should be and get used to having a really nice position. Now, the thing is that if you get them on the bike, but before you put them on the bike on the stand, you've got to take your stand that you have, and that stands have to be level, so that you start out with a level ground. Basically, uphill and downhill, you cannot compensate for it because that's normal as you're riding the bike. But basically, you start with the thing level out, and whether you need your spacers for the front end or the back end or the front wheel, wherever you have to do that, that's how you start. And then you get the customer up on the bike, and if he's way too high or way too low, then the rider, you just do a quick adjustment on the saddle to get them in the ballpark. And I always like to start out when I do a fitting with the feet. We got to get the feet going first, and so you get that kind of in the ballpark. And then as you progress around to the rest of the bicycle and to the saddle and the bars, then you may or may not make a small adjustment to the feet, but you have to start there. Otherwise, you don't know where that is. Now, important is when you first get them up on the bike that you have your mirror, and you got to have your mirror positioned so that the rider can see himself completely fore and aft, and you can see him, and you need room to move around the rider so that you can see him from the right. I say him, but it's the rider, him or her, and you see the rider from the front, from the back, from each side, so you can evaluate what you're looking at as you're making your own mental assessment. And then as you do that, you start to share with the rider what you're seeing and where you think you have to go and what you have to do. And as a result, then, as you're doing this, you realize, and this is why I mentioned you got to have a couple of little seats, because the rider's going to be getting off and on the bicycle maybe 4, 5, 6 times before you have these things finalized. You got to change a saddle, you got to change a bar. Yeah, they can sit down and play with their iPhone or whatever for a couple of minutes while you're doing that. And it depends on whether you have an older bike or a newer bike. the nice new bikes that have the integral headsets and the threadless, that's a lot easier. But on the other side of the coin, if you got an old-fashioned bike, which are getting fewer and fewer now, obviously, why then you've got a heck of a lot more job taking tape off and removing handles and all that. So that as a result, then you're sharing what you got, you're starting with the feet, and you're getting the detail and how the rider is feeling. And then the thing is, you got to remember the old shoes were flat. And this is where the ankling came in when people said ankling, because the shoe was flat. And then because they pedaled a little lower gears, they would put their ankle down a little bit and then rotate it in a circle and then bring it back up again. Now with the new shoes, as you look at the profile of a shoe, you got your front end of the shoe with a toe, and then the arch already starts to slant up to the back, and the heel is way up in the air. It's like a half inch or whatever. The various shoes vary. So that a new shoe is almost like you're running on the pedals. The old shoe, you were pedaling on the pedal, so you needed a little more ankle motion. The new shoes, the ankle motion is almost built in inadvertently, but then you do have it, you drop your, but by the time you drop your heel to where it's even with your toes, you're going to be way down on the ankle, and that's too much. So that has subtracted a little bit from the real ankling spinning motion that people have, but that's progress in the bikes and the way they're designed and the way the gearing is. So that's not really a problem. But the interesting part is that as you look at it, whether you're a size 6 shoe or a size 13, all the pedals are the same. They're the same width when you look at them, in each model pedal. Obviously, some pedals are wider, some of them narrower. But for a lady or a man with a really small foot or a very long, big foot, you've got the same pedal width. So you've got to adjust your feet to that particular pedal. And a lot of people are always saying, well, I don't like, you want to have the knuckle, the ball of your metatarsal on over the center of the spindle. Well, I don't particularly hold with that. And because I think that puts your toe too far back. Everybody's foot is different. When I went to get a pair of shoes once, the shoe salesman was an old timer, and he said, Ted, he says, you have a European foot. He says, you have very long arch in that and a short toes. He says, that's typical of Caucasian people that come from Europe years ago, from generation of Northern Europe. And I thought to myself, how did this guy know that? And then I thought about that as I was doing the bike fittings. And I started looking, yeah, people have long toes, they have short toes, their arches in different position. So you have to balance your cleat to the foot. And whether that's a little bit more fore or a little bit more aft, or a little bit out, a little bit more in, that doesn't make any difference. It just has to be where the feet feel comfortable. And like I was speaking with Greg, and the things along the same line, what you have to end up with is 2 happy feet. A lot of times you get one foot that's really nice and there's a little variation of foot, and one foot that's not so happy. Well, then you got to work with the unhappy foot and make it happy so that as a person pedals, he feels comfortable stepping down on the pedal. And you don't have to have a lot of different stuff. They've got this odd tool that you can take somebody's shoe off, and then you measure the angle of the varus, what I can't remember what that is now, and then you try to figure out the spacers on the shoe. Well, the shoe with the cleat, when you're figuring out these spacers, you don't really have to do that, because then you got to take the shoe on and off and this and back, and then it makes it arbitrary for you to adjust that angle and the millimeters just right. Well, that may or may not work that well. I found that it didn't always work that well for me. So I just had the people, I worked with the cleat and with the foot and with the spacers that we had. Now, even before Paul Swift and his really great mind, he came up with a little, the tapered wedges. I was already playing with stuff like that with people with different length lengths and foot size, because I would take little plastic or nylon pieces and then cut them to the shape of the cleat and drill them out and put the longer screws through, or start making leather wedges and cutting the angles on them. So we were doing that stuff through the years. It's just that when they came out with these beautiful tapered wedges, well, that worked like $1 million. And then you could staple them, from one direction to the other. You could make either a total flat piece and just have an elevation, 2, 3, or 2, 4, or 6, made a nice 1/8 of an inch or whatever distance you needed for leg reach difference. And then you could play with it or put an angle on to make the foot feel better on the inside or on the outside, so that as you step down on the pedal, you have this even stroke on the bottom of your foot. And you would balance that out from the front to the back. And I usually like to measure, rather than with a plumb line, I enjoyed measuring with the straight edges, because to me, the plumb line moves around a lot, and I had to move it all the time and hold it at the bottom, and it wiggled, and it just didn't work as well for me. But then, of course, your mileage may vary. You may like that better. That's okay. I mean, what you use it, how you use it, isn't critical as far as I'm concerned. The main thing is it works for you and for your bike rider. And I use the level that I could use in an upright. And then I could, mark on the shoe just a little bit and say, this is the metatarsal center of the large knuckle on your big toe, and go up and then measure. People said they want to measure to the middle of the knee. Well, you measure to the middle of the knee, and a lot of times that gives you too forward a position, because then you're really stroking along, but you can't really push on the pedals quite as hard as you want. So to me, I would measure to the front of the kneecap, and that seemed to me to be a little bit better with the metatarsal and then the balancing of that foot. And whether the metatarsal was in the front of the spindle or in the, it isn't critical, or on the spindle, it was depending on the foot size. And usually it was a little bit in front, because that allowed the people to get a good balance on their pedal, because you had to feel a balance. Often people come in and say, my toes fall asleep, or boy, I really get tired to center my foot. Well, that's where you have to move the cleat fore and aft so that they don't feel any more foot pressure than arch pressure. That's what you have to balance out. And when you balance that out and the person can really stomp on the pedals, then they can use their ankle motion as it is and ride beautiful pedal circles, because they feel balanced on both feet. They have two happy feet. And as you bring it around with your feet and with your leg opposite your knee and your hip, that all makes a nice circle. And I used to tell the people that they could consider your pedal motion as a double Ferris wheel, if that makes sense. Because you look at London, a beautiful double Ferris wheel. Well, you've got the crank spindle, and that's going in a circle. Then you've got the long crank arm, and it goes forward and backward, and you've got your foot going in a circle, you've got your knee going in a circle, and you've got your hip basically going somewhat in a circle. So you've got this on both sides. So you basically have a double Ferris wheel. Up to a point, you can just imagine that, and maybe that makes a little bit more sense to your customer, and or for you to make a point as to how they have the concept of pedaling as a circular motion. Obviously, you push up a hill or against the wind, you're going to stomp a little bit more rather than pedal up so much. But then that's all in the technique of riding, and you learn it as you go along. And if you're a good coach, or if you're a good cycle person, you can tell that to your customers. But that's all in part of the fit process as you're speaking to the people. So that you can kind of go as you're looking along, and it's really interesting, because you've got to make sure that you adjust the feet. Fore and aft people have different size feet, different leg length, so you've got to compensate for all that stuff on your cleat and on your spacers and on everything going back and forth. Whoops, sorry, that's my phone. I'll just slide back and, well, the hell with it, I'll leave the answering machine go. It's only a couple of little numbers. They were bugging me. They probably want to sell me some I don't know, some kind of cleaner or whatever from my roof, who knows. All right, that's the end of what we got here. On the feet, it gives you a basic concept of how I would do that. And this is why I told you, you've got to have all these different cleat stuff. You got to have the long screws. What if you put a 1/4 inch of a spacer in there? Well, you've got to have a long pedal screw, the little cleat screw, to compensate for that. So you need this little box of screws with all different lengths to get a full bite on the thread so it doesn't loosen. And if you put various spacers together, if you're worried about them sliding, I never had that problem. They didn't move. But on the other side of that coin, you could always put a little bit of glue some kind in between, and that would hold them from sliding. But it didn't even have the problem. Once you really screw down on them, you didn't have any difficulty with that. But see, that's why I said when you need tools, you need all kinds of tools to play with the cleats, because sometimes the shoes don't fit where you have to move the cleat. Well, then you have to alter the shoe a little bit. Well, does that take a real sharp scalpel, or does it take something to cut out on the leather or on the rubber, or is the shoe? You got to play with that stuff. And that's where your ingenuity comes in when you're doing a fitting, making the shoe and or then the cleat fit that customer's needs for his feet, that he gets a nice even stroke on the pedal. So you can kind of let that go through your minds. I'll have a sip of water here. to keep me sober. And and then you can think about that a little bit, and then we'll go from the feet, and we'll go towards the saddle, if that would be okay for you. So just a quick second here.
Thank you, Ted. This has been awesome so far. And I see Greg's been putting a lot of things in the chat. He hopped off quickly because his connection was glitching out, but he's coming back. So very informative so far.
You could hear me well back and forth, or you're
Perfect.
good?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now on the saddle, it's really tricky with the saddle because people have so much different muscle mass, and some people, and this is where it gets rather personal. And we're all adults here, and we're saying this in a clinical fashion, so that you have to understand that we have different crotch widths. And whether that's just the way your bones are structured or it's the way your muscle mass is, you have to compensate for that on the saddle. The interesting part is really heavier people have a lot more muscle mass and body, fat or whatever it is that's there. They're going to, a lot of times, use a narrower saddle. And it's just counterintuitive. They come in, they ride this big wide seat you think they can put on a horse. But on the other hand, they have so much mass that you put them on a narrower seat, and if the bones fit in right, they're home free. Even though they got this narrow seat, they look at you in amazement. But it has to fit their particular derriere, as it were, because even Diamond Jim Brady, who's a gal who was at the turn of the century. Well, I can't think of her name now. It'll come back to me. But she was riding a bicycle in the gay 90s, and they had a special saddle made for her. Then they took a plaster cast of her bottom, and they actually fit little soft spots on the saddle so she could ride her nice upright bicycle in the 1890s. And they had soft spots made with calf skin and with horsehair, so that her tuberosities, her sit bones, could fit down in there and be very, very comfy. So as a result, and they were doing that stuff over 100 years ago. It's not like this is some new magic with the gel that's fallen out off of some spacecraft that's come from some unknown planet. I mean, this is just good news, improved news from the old news. So either way we win, because that's all in our favor. So that as a result, then, you're looking on the seat, and what you're trying to do is get fore and aft that's comfortable for this person. And it will vary a little bit with the person to their size, taller person, shorter person. You have to kind of adjust that to where they're getting a good stroke in the pedal motion. And that a lot of times will come as you fit their knee over the crank arm, because that ensures when you're over the crank arm that your pedal stroke is the same, regardless what size of a person you are. And what you have to have then on the thing is the angle and the height of the seat. You measure that out. And I like to go to where, Cole and the other, some years ago, they had it figured out at around 140 degrees. And that's a very good starting point. And then, of course, on your goniometer, it gives you a plus or a minus of 5 degrees. And I always found that that's more, if you're not real good at fitting yet, that might be okay there. But as I got more experience, I found that I could work within a couple of 3 degrees either side. So it gave me a 5 degree spread rather than a 10 degree spread. And as you also have to remember, if you have a long foot or a shorter foot, your heel comes up when you stroke up much farther, one way or the other. So you have to adjust the seat height to compensate for the foot length also, because it's a combination of variation on that particular, these two factors, so that you've got to look at them as they're pedaling along. And which is why, as you're looking at a person and you circle around them, and the person can see themselves in the mirror. So you have to tell the person, look at yourself. You see what I mean? When I say drop your heel or raise your heel, you see how your knee changes if you do that. Now, if I sit the seat like this and you have a nice pedal motion, look how your knee is in a nice position like this. And you can tell the release and the looseness of the kneecap, and that it doesn't get overstretched behind your knee, in the hollow of your knee. So as a result, and you can see this balance coming about as you're changing the seat height a little bit at a time. Now, granted, you may have to get the bike rider out and off the seat a few times as you change the saddle. And that's where it's tricky, because if you want to change the screws on each seat and do a seat post, it's going to take you 9.5 days to do the fitting. But on the other time, if you have some bushings and you have some couple of different, seat posts that you could push up to fit the different seat post sizes, 26.2, 26.6, 8, 27, 27.2. Well, you can fit five or six different saddle types onto any bicycle, especially his own bike, if you don't have a fitting bike of your own, you see, because not everybody has a cycle sizer. You're using an exerciser, a turbo thing, and you're leveling that out with the customer's bike. And you've adjusted that so it's level with their bike that they're going to ride or one that they're buying off your floor. And you're adjusting that to the person who's going to ride the bicycle. So that's why as you have the saddle adjustment and you're making it narrower or fore and aft, you've got to see how the pedal stroke is. I made an interesting observation some years ago. And I was wondering, as you're looking at a person from the back, and their hips go down, is that person riding too high or is the hip actually going up? And this is a muscle mass. Do you have so much muscle mass on your butt that as you pedal down, it pushes your hip up? Or do you have muscle mass that's leaner and your hip actually goes down as you stroke down with your foot? And that's an interesting observation I thought I made, so that you have to decide which is it with this person as they're pedaling, because you see them from the back and you see their hips going up and down. And then in your own mind, even if you're just riding along as a cyclist, you're always doing a fitting, whether you're in your laboratory or your studio or not. As I see people riding down the street, I'll say, oh, that person ought to raise the seat an inch. It's just, it's just a mental note. You do that whether you like it or not. It's just built in you because you're a good bike dealer and you're conscientious of how a rider should look on a bicycle, and you can't help it. It's kind of second nature, but that's okay. That's a good thing. So that's kind of where we are with the saddle. And of course, you've also got to worry about the crank length and at the same time, with the saddle. And years ago, people thought maybe you could change a different crank length. Well, that didn't work out as well because your circle is different. What you have to do is if you have a different leg length, you adjust the cranks by putting spacers in. You have to fit the good normal leg, and then the short leg is the one you have to adjust to match the long leg. That's the way the concept works. You can't fit the short leg because then the long leg is going to be way crunched up. So you fit the long leg, the normal leg, and the short leg or the higher hip is the one that needs to be spaced out to match. And then you have to have your saddle and the fore and aft and all that adjusted accordingly, because that ends up being the balance on the bike. And it usually ends up probably around, what was it, maybe 55, 45 to the back, about 55 in the front end, maybe 45. If you look at it, you don't get all the weight on the back wheel, because then you get too hard pushing up the hill. You can't have all the weight on the front end, then your back end washes out, or you don't have good steering. So you need to look at your own mind's eye as to where the balance is between the saddle fore and aft and the seat adjustment and the knee adjustment and then the front end of the bicycle. But that's all part of the concept that you're doing as you're doing a fitting. So now let me kind of progress from there. So you're adjusting your seat up and down. You've got the shoes doing pretty well. And you've got that cleat, two happy feet kind of moseying along and in and out, because you got to also watch where the heel clears the frame. And then you also have to watch on the inside by your metatarsal on your big toe that you don't touch the crank all the time. So you got to move the foot in and out with the cleat so that you clear the pedal crank, that all doesn't touch, and then they're drilling the back of the heel so that all looks nice and alike. Now, people have had injuries, they've had damage, they've had different stuff. So sometimes one foot is going to have straight ahead and one foot is going to be in a little bit or out a little bit. That's okay. None of us are perfectly normal or symmetric. So as a result, then you adjust the rider to their personal way. You want to straighten out their feet when their foot wants to go out a little bit. I mean, I broke my hip riding once and I got 4 pins in my hip. Well, my left foot sits out a couple of 3 degrees more than my right foot does now. But it took me a year to get a new position with my cleat. I thought I was going to have to quit riding, and finally it fell into place so that my left foot points out a little bit and my right foot is fairly straight. Well, that's the way it goes. So use your own experience or use my experience, and you put that onto your customers, because that makes you a better fitter and that makes your customer, your rider, a lot happier. And this is what it's all about, that this guy feels really great on his bicycle, or the gal, and comes back and wants to buy a New Jersey or whatever, you see. So that you're making good customers and you're making good cyclists, which is what we're all trying to do. Now on the bars, it then varies from the saddle, obviously. So I get the people to where they're leaning forward. And then as you start to lean forward, you've got to be able to come down with your arms at a pretty nice, easy reach to the bar. And then you have to adjust the height accordingly. And of course, with the new old-fashioned stems, you had to get the Nito stems or other kind of stems and could raise and lower them. And that got to be a nightmare after a while. You could only raise the stem so far. You wouldn't break the darn headset off because the wedge is too high up. But then you could get these Nito stems. And I went so far as to when you needed one that was taller, I could do a specialized stem. You know, you had those, and I cut them to size. If I didn't need it, you know, one that was like how long, 130 or 40 or 50 centimeters or 200 millimeters, well, I would take the darn thing off and just cut it to size. So I had a good insertion into the fork, and I had dies and I put them in, you know, I cut the thread down on the long stem bolt and they fit the wedge, and I did all that stuff myself, because that's what you do if you have a shop, if you wanted to do this. Otherwise, now with the new stems, with the threadless, woo, we got made in the shade. But unfortunately, you get people coming in with their bikes that you're going to do a fitting on. Well, they're taking their threadless stem and they've cut the damn stem off to where it's got 1/8 of an inch over the so-called lock nut. Well, now where do you go? You can't raise that handlebar. You've got to come up and sell them a new stem. And now this is where you have to have these new stems, different angles, 6 degrees, 4 degrees, so many degrees, 12 degrees, and you've got to go up and back and forth and around and move the stuff to fit to make your customer happy. Unfortunately, you have to sell them something that you may not have had to do if you could have worked with their bike, but you have to work with what you got. And that's just the way it goes. And fortunately now, they're making so many stems that are adjustable and that you can take the in and out and do all this kind of stuff. So as a result, then you're fitting the stem. And remember, the new handlebar levers, where everything is in the new lever. You've got the brake mechanism and your shifting mechanism. That's all in the lever. So the new handlebar lever on your bar is a good 1/2 inch or more longer than the old-fashioned lever, where you just had the brake on the lever, and then your shifting lever would be on the frame or up on the stem, depending on the bicycle that you had, or a handlebar shifter. So as a result, then you've got a lot more going now, and almost compromised on the bars because they haven't made the bar different. And this is where different bars come in. So you have to have, 4, 5, 6, 7 different kind of handlebars in stock, because they come different bends, different depths, different widths, and it makes it kind of tricky. You got to fit a bar to the customer. You can't put a 46 centimeter wide bar on somebody who's 5'2" and weighs 100 pounds. You need a 38 or a 36 in the center, so that you've got to be able to compensate for that stuff as you go along, which is rather important, you see. And it's just a matter of fitting the customer where the bike is going to fit him properly, or the customer fits the bike then, because you've got the bike that adjusts to that person's physique, and that really makes it nice. And then they have anatomic bars now, and that's tricky because you got to get the bottom of the bar to the angle that you want, and once you get the angle of the bar on the bottom, then of course you're fitting the lever up on top to a height to where the customer can reach it very comfortably. But you don't want that to reach so far that they pull themselves off the saddle. That position when they're up on the levers has got to be such that as you're sitting on the saddle, you can sit in the saddle and you wedge the saddle between your legs. And when you grip the saddle, that's when people say they get saddle sore. Well, it's not that their butt always hurts on the sit bones. It's that any muscles that are in your between your legs, the tight muscles that you're gripping the saddle with, that you're pedaling along. And it's just like riding a horse. You get used to riding a horse like that, and you've got to get tough leg muscles up on the upper thing, up in the upper crotch area, to where they're gripping the saddle and they're nice and strong and tough and hardened to riding. So that's how that goes along as you're pedaling. And you tell the people that. And one thing that I used to tell my customers when they first started riding, and it's very important if they haven't ridden for a long time, or they're just starting out riding as an adult, and they want to go for longer rides, And here they've got the 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 bucks invested in a bike, and they want to go for a 100-mile bike ride. Well, you have to look at them very seriously to say, look, we know you have a lot of money invested, and I want you to make that money to good time eventually, but it doesn't come overnight. Champions aren't made, they don't fall from heaven, they have to train a little bit. And as a result, then it's the same for you. And you're working, you're going to school, you're doing all the other stuff. So this is a whole new dimension. So when you go for a bike ride, go out as far as you can until you feel really good. And when you say you're feeling good, like, oh man, I want to keep on going, I can ride another 25, 50 miles. I says, that's the time you turn around. Then when you get home, you will be pleasantly tired and you will enjoy your ride because you'll have a workout that says, oh man, I really feel good. Now, whether that's 5 miles or 10 miles or 20 miles doesn't make any difference, but you have to instill that message to them that they don't overdo it and get tired. And like Greg and I were speaking the other day, and like I mentioned, if your customer comes home after a bike ride and he says, oh, then he talks to himself, he says, God, I hate this. My butt hurts. I can't even sit down in it. I got to eat off the mantelpiece for 4 days. Well, what the hell good is that? He's not going to want to ride his bike. He's going to put it in the garage. It's going to be a garage queen. And 10 years down the line, it's going to be dusty. It'll be a garage fine for somebody who wants an old bicycle. It'll be in his scrapyard because he throws it in the trash. Well, we can't afford that. Not as a bike riding customer. You want that customer to keep riding. So you say, even though it galls them, it makes them feel less, tell them you have to do this. Ride till you feel good, turn around, get home feeling really great that you want to go out in 2, 3, 4 days again. And then you go 5 or 10 miles farther. Each time you'll be able to go a little farther. Well, within a month, you're going 25 or 50 miles. You say, well, how did I do that? This is terrific. Well, in a couple, 3, 4 months, you can go 100 miles maybe. However you want to do, whatever your intensity is, that doesn't make any difference. And I always told the customers as I was fitting them on the bars and with the levers and different stuff, you got to remember, pain on the bike comes from your intensity. It doesn't come because of a bad position. Even the old timers in 1900, they understood that you didn't ride on your bike or you didn't go on your bike, you were in your bike. You have to feel that you're in your bicycle. That's the key to it. That bike has to be an extension of your body. It's part of you when you're on that bicycle. You just sit into it, you get down in there, and you want to go. And that's the way it should feel for you, you see, and that's how you fit your person on a bike. Now, when it comes to the anatomic levers, okay, you got this long lever. Well, now if you fit the lever to where they're comfortable on riding, because most of the people ride up on the bars most of the time, well, then sometimes the top of the bar might be a little bit short because you've got this long lever, or the bottom in the drop is going to be a little bit short. But that's the compensation we have to make now, because the bar is not always in a forward throw to match the long throw of the new levers with all the mechanism inside of it. So you have to kind of blend that and compensate that to where it feels good. Now, if you get a nice angle on the top of the bar, the bottom of the bar, even though it's anatomic, the anatomic position might be baloney. It might not fit the angle of where the customer wants to go down the bar at all. And then the customer says, well, I never go down there. And I says, no, I says, you will go down there once in a while. Say sometimes you want to just rest yourself and just rest down in there. You can kind of relax your back and your shoulders and your muscle a little bit, and you go down in there for a while and you feel a little bit better. But you got to feel comfortable down there. So that maybe you're going against the wind, you want to ride a little bit harder, you get out of the wind a little bit more so you can tuck down in. So that should be comfortable also. Then it seems to make more sense to them. But if they're comfy up on top with the flat of the bar and with their extra lever and that anatomic position is off, then I used to take old handlebars and cut a 2-3 inch section out of them and cut them in half. And then I would cut them in half, then you made a, and I would actually put them on the handlebar in the position when into they might stay with that, or are we good?
It's a little bit glitchy, Ted.
Okay, how's it now?
It's good now. Well, let's
Okay.
go. We'll see how it goes.
Whatever, all right, because I can move this around a little bit if I have to, but you know, see what's in the way here. Anyhow, I'll take another sip, and then you'll like to put those little half pipes in the handlebar and put it to the position where they could reach it really nicely and become on the drops for a while. And that made all the difference in the world. You put the tape over them, you put them into place, they never moved. You made your own anatomy. That's really what it was all about.
Ted, this is so informative, and I'm really enjoying listening to you. There's so many little bullet points you're picking out that might be just like normal things that we're, not remembering every day because we're doing it every day. And I love, Greg, all the stuff you're putting into the chat here.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions right now for Ted? Not to sideline him, but while he's taking a drink of water, does anyone come up with any questions?
Yeah, because I'm just going to go through, I'm almost kind of done. You get a basic overall of how we would do the fitting. You start with the feet, you go to the saddle, then to the bottom, you get the forward, you get the aft, the high, the low, and all that stuff. You tinker with that stuff, and pretty soon you're finalizing it, and then they're ready to go for a ride. And to get ready to go for a ride, you have to tell them, well, I don't know if it's 100%. We try to get it just right, but you can't all do that. So as a result, you got to go out for rides now, see how you feel, give me some feedback. A phone number, call me anytime, we can set you in a position. And that's, of course, down the line. Then you have to figure you're charging X fee for your fitting. Do you figure one or two maybe come in with that? You charge them extra? Do you do it? I never used to charge extra for that. I figured that was part of my fit. Pretty perfect the first time that and didn't want to come back. They came for a little readjustment. Oh, sometimes you had to change the stem or a little bit of the handlebar, lever, untape it, do this again. That's okay. Well, that's all fitting to utilize it for them. The most I think I had was 3 or 4 times. One, whatever, over half, whatever, came back once or not at all. And then you get to be good at it and minimize your comeback time. But the one thing you have to tell your customer when you give them the spec sheet is only good for parts on that bike. If they go out and buy a new saddle, so put that new saddle on their bike, and they think they measured it right, what if the saddle length is different? What if this place on that bike where they're fore and aft, not the tip of the seat, where their fore and aft is comfortable on that seat is entirely different by your legs stroke off right away. Then your knee goes where it doesn't want to be. So as a result, then you're off on your from the front wheel to the back wheel. And or maybe it's a different saddle thickness. What if you got a Brooks leather saddle, which is X thick from the rail to the top of the seat, and you put a beautiful thin nylon seat on that has no padding, but that's still be soft, almost half the thickness there. Well, you got to raise that seat, compensate for the difference between the Brooks and your new plastic saddle. So that changes the whole position on the bike. You have to tell her that come back, you have to come back for a refitting because you don't know they are taking refitting their bike. Them of that factor that they don't go and do something because people are crazy to do that kind of stuff. They want to change, and because that's human nature. So you got to kind of warn them in advance as to what may or may not happen. And as a result, then I don't know how you want to do, with your all you could, people that are sitting in, listen, how you want to charge them for the refit, but always kind of figured that, okay, if they had to come back for a little quickie, I could do that. That was not much of a problem. So that, if you want to have a couple of questions, and I can keep going a bit more if you want, that just, I don't have that much. And because some of the stuff that I have in my general anecdotes already went through, also that, do I have to start maybe?
No, we're trying to start it, but maybe we turned you off for a second just to see if we could make the connection better, Ted.
Okay.
But if you can see how to turn your camera on, we would love to welcome you back for the questions as well. I think Rochelle's trying to do it as well. Yeah, you made a great point there, as Greg was pointing out about the follow-up process. And Greg, you mentioned here as well that.
So I don't know.
There you are, Ted. We see you again.
Yeah.
Yay. Awesome. Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. Now,
yeah.
because I can see you.
Yep, we can see you now.
We got
Oh,
you.
okay, you're good. All right. All right. So let me try to finish up here. All right. So we went into pedaling circles, your hips and all that good stuff. We know the double Ferris wheel. Another thing I used to people, and I used a couple examples something that they understand the concept of the between the saddle and their leg bar. If you look at yourself on a bike, yourself with your legs going in a nice circle, stroking forward, pushing you down the road, and then your arms working with your legs and your body at the same time. And of course, to keep your balance, so you don't go from one side of the road to the other, you're compensating with a little body angle, or with your left leg and your right arm and your right arm and your left leg, so that you're balancing that one side to the other, so you ride a nice straight line. And you can almost liken that, if you liken it into the mechanical world, look at a locomotive, old steam engine locomotive. You got this great big flywheels in the back, and then they would go around. Those are like your legs pushing from the saddle. Then you have your arms. They're like the pistons that went to the front, to the little chamber at the front. They were going back and forth as the back wheel circled, the big back wheel circled on the locomotive. Your arms would go back and forth. Well, your arms aren't going back and forth like a steam engine, but they're pulling from a fixed position, as if you were like on the locomotive. Internally, they're moving back and forth all the time. You're pulling, you're relaxing, you're pulling, you're relaxing. You don't see the motion much, but it's an internal motion like a steam locomotive. So you figure they're going down the track straight. Well, you have to make your bike go down the road straight, so that your motion is internal, and you're pulling the opposite side, leg, arm, leg, so that you keep yourself in a straight line. But that's how you are, like that steam engine, like a locomotive. Or another one I used was, you can look at a cat, the cat world. When you look at a panther, a tiger, when they jump, what do? Their back paws, they dig in and they leap with their back paw, just like the big wheel on a locomotive. They put this big claw into the ground and they leap forward. Well, the front arms also pull the upper body forward, and then they just lunge themselves up in the air 5, 8, 10, 15, 20 feet, whatever that particular animal is capable of. So you're like a cat in that respect also. Your back legs are pushing on the cranks, on the pedals, and your forearms are pulling your body forward on the handlebar, and they're lunging through the air, but you're propelling yourself along the highway. So 2 examples like that can give your rider a mind's eye view of what they're doing with their body internally and how that works for them as a cyclist. I don't know if that concept is unclear to all of you, but it's something that I came up with, through the years. You think about it and you let your imagination wander, but then that's what it's all about. You got to let your imagination, you got to think off the wall once in a while, and all of a sudden you come up and say, holy mackerel, all right, it's like that. I'll be darned. And then
Ted, I'd love to give the audience a chance to ask a few questions
okay. Yeah, because I got almost everything going here. The
clarify a few points.
So we're good.
Great.
Okay.
Great.
Right,
let's open up the floor and as all of you can tell, we have just a massive wealth of knowledge here, and take the opportunity to pick his brain. So I'm gonna zip it and let you ask Ted some questions.
Yeah, Phil.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, I can hear you pretty well, thanks. You got an ABLA cap on, wow.
Yeah.
Overacting.
We have probably the best fitter in the Southeast that works here, but when he's not here, especially a lot of our newer people, what's an easy or a simple way to train them so that when he's not at work, we can still sell road bikes, we can still get at least know the size. He'll do the final fits, but we really struggle. I've bought tools in the past that I thought would take a newer person, that we could train them up pretty quickly so that they could tell if the person need a 51 or 54, if they knew which top tube link would be correct.
Yeah.
So how do when our excellent fitter's not here, what do we do? How do I?
Well, the thing is, you have to look at your fitter when he's there, and one at a time, depending on the rest of your staff or yourself, you stand there and you watch and you listen. So you pick up little things from him. By listening, you steal with your ears and with your eyes, so that you don't have to talk a lot. You just how he does that. And then you take small shortcuts, you exert things that he's got, you extract it for your own quick fit use, then you can do a pretty good fitting. If you watch him 4, 5, 6, 7 times, there's a pattern that he does, like much similar to what I'm doing, I'm sure. And as a result, then you learn from just kind of looking at him, and it's like class time every time he does a fitting. And you just have to kind of do that. And if there's 1 or 2 people, depending on the size of your staff, that's there regularly when he's not there, then maybe you can instruct that person to do that, and or yourself, whoever has an opportunity, and you do, and you could probably put them up on on a turbo trainer or something really quick, and do a small fit to get them in the ballpark. That's going to do work pretty well for you, because right away, if somebody comes in and they've got the guys or a gal is like 6'2", and they got legs that are 38 inches long, and then you get short torso, well, darn well you're going to have to sell them a 62 centimeter frame or 63 centimeter frame or whatever, and then you're going to have to take that 13 centimeter stem off and put on an 8 centimeter stem maybe. I mean, you get to look at them, right away. So that's the way it goes. I mean, just from my experience, I had a gal come in once, and she was about
Hey, Ted, can I throw my 2 cents in on this?
I'm sorry?
May I throw my 2 cents in on this?
Go right ahead.
All right. Thank you very much. So I really like what Ted was saying about some mentorship. And we find oftentimes that in servicing, if your fitter is willing to do it, having a night where you get everybody together, have a couple of beers or whatever, and sit down and talk about fit. And this is not only for folks that you're looking to have sizing. This is for sales staff that has the potential to sell fit in your shop. So that people are speaking the same language, the messaging is the same, whether it's somebody that's working behind the register or whether it's one of the folks that you have that are wrenching on bikes. They have the same vocabulary when it comes to why bike fit is important and what it entails. And I think the other thing to be clear about is that sizing a bike is different than fitting a bike. And as long as the customer has an understanding that what we're doing today is just making sure that this bike is going to work underneath your body, it's not dialed in for you. That's more bike fitting. This is just to make sure that we're honing down a size that's going to work for you. And honestly, where that starts to get a little complicated is that, humans are all different shapes and sizes. And you'll often find someone that's in between 2 sizes of bikes. And that's when it's great to have the person with a little bit more experience to be able to say which one is going to suit that rider's needs a little bit better. And I think that it's not inappropriate if you've got somebody in there and they're really interested to have them look at a couple of different things, hone it down to 2 sizes, and then when it's appropriate, have your fitter with more experience weigh in.
That's good. That's really great. That's a super addition to that to fill in. That really makes a complete picture for the gentleman that was asking the question.
I love this. I love the experience here. Any other, Phil, did that answer your question? There were some great things. Oh, Beth, I see your hand up too. Sorry.
Okay. I was just going to say, a lot of times if you don't have someone who's experienced with fit, when you're just trying to get the size, because again, it is different than fitting. There's a couple of just quick flexibility things you can do. So you can take your size chart, and if they're between, say, a 54 and a 56, just do a couple of flexibility tests, like neck flexion and extension. If their extension can't go very far, then right away their bars are going to probably have to be a little higher. And if they're not flexible at all as far as their spinal structure, so they don't curve down really like a gymnast would, but maybe has a little hump at the top when they go towards reaching their toes, their spine's not as flexible. If they're between sizes and you do those 2 things alone, and the bars have to go up, well, if you're starting with a smaller size bike, it's always going to be harder to get the bars up. There are some parts now, like hover bars, which have a little higher rise in the bar that help get you up. But in general, I find if they're not flexible and they're between sizes, then I will go up a size. It makes the reach a little difficult. You're always going to have, it's probably going to be a little too long for them on the 56 versus the 54, but it's much easier to shorten them than if you run out of bike. Because the car, especially when you're dealing with a lot of carbon steerer tubes, you can only go so high with the stack, with the spacers. Does that make sense?
That's really good. And that was a great point you made, because I'm the same way. I have short legs and a longer body, and I have to ride a larger frame than my leg reach would normally allow for. I could ride a couple centimeters shorter frame, but then I have to take the longer side, which is a little bit tougher when I stand over the top tube. But on the other hand, I get the top tube length that I need better, and I can fit the bike better as far as my reach is concerned. So your point is really good, and I like that. That it made a good differentiation between choosing a different frame size. Take the little larger size in the case, like you're saying, really well.
Phil, I saw you were going to add something too. Or did you have something? No, now you're muted too. Sorry.
All right, no, I was just saying that, yeah, that difference between the sizing and fitting, I love the way you explain that, because that's what I need our people to be able to get the size. You're right, at least down to 2 sizes, so we can at least talk about stuff, especially with availability being so iffy. It's not like, next week when our fitter's back that he can just call up and order whatever we want. So it's, the ability for us to narrow that size down, and for those people to learn over time those nuances, like you were talking about, flexibility and reach and everything. So, fortunately, I have enough experience that I'm kind of our second tier man here. But, we have our expert fitter, we have me, and then everybody else is kind of weak. So, we got to bring everybody else's game up so we can be more thorough, because on Thursday when our fitter's not here, it's kind of like, could you come back tomorrow? That doesn't work very good.
Oh. Anyone?
I have to make an off-the-wall comment here. The gentleman just speaking has that nice poster on the wall of the wine from 1900. That poster, as far as we had a couple of years ago when it came out, it was outlawed in Alabama because it was indecent. So I sent one to my daughter in Alabama, and she has it up at her house. If you look back at the gentleman from the NBDA, that poster there on the wall. Yeah, that's the one. So anyways, at least you have a pretty good poster there. That's pretty fun type stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, we're in Georgia, so I don't know if it's legal here or not.
Okay, next question. We're ready.
Yeah. Does anybody here use the old Fit Kit system just for sizing bikes? I mean, I find that works really well to be able to teach junior people around the shop, at least be able to help someone or guide someone to the right size bike.
Yeah, I
when I'm
think
not around.
from a sizing standpoint, kind of understanding anthropomorphic measurements, what is your inseam, how long are your arms, what's your torso like, I think can be really helpful. The problem we run into is that there are many people that want to use that only that information only as a fitting process, and there's just a lot more that goes into that. How is somebody going to use the bike that they're buying? What is their strength profile? What does their flexibility profile look like? And adding those lenses to how you look at somebody on a bicycle gives you a much more educated and data-driven opinion on how to make and what changes to make for someone on the bicycle. But initially, to your point, using some of those measures just to do some sizing is a great way to do it if you have access to that stuff. not for nothing, but the fit kit system stuff is not inexpensive. So it's
Oh, no, I know. Yeah.
if you have it in your back pocket, use the heck out of it. So
Yeah, I use it for the just the initial sizing. You know, someone walks in, you know, straight out, you know, off the street, and I find that usually they've been to other bike shops where they haven't been sized at all. So it's kind of an impressive tool because most people have never been, you know, put through any kind of a sizing system. And by the time they make it to my shop, you know, they've had the experience of walking into a shop and throwing a leg over a bike. And so it kind of sets us apart, and I find that it helps to sell bikes. It makes a customer for me. So
well, and it sets you apart because it shows that you have an investment in them. I mean, one of the things that I talk about, one of the catchphrases I use is that, you know, buying a bike is buying a piece of equipment. Buying a fit is investing in yourself, right? And investing in your experience of riding the bike. And that makes a really big difference. You know, it's not just this add-on thing that we throw on. It's that, you know what, we genuinely want you to have a good experience riding a bike. You know, and so that's why we do it, because we care.
you know, I think going back to your what you mentioned at the beginning of the call about bike companies going direct now, I think it's a really easy way to sell against them. You know, that you're a when you're a smaller shop or you're an independent shop, that, you know, you are, if you take the time to educate them a little bit about that, it seems to make an impression. You know, people are coming in with a little bit more information in their back pocket than they did before. They've spent the last 2 or 3 years watching Neil Stansberry and all these guys on YouTube. And so they have a good idea of what they should be experiencing when they're coming in to spend $3,000 or $4,000 on a bike. And I almost feel like they're testing bike shops sometimes, you know, to see if the proper questions are being asked.
Well, you guys know, I mean, I think everybody I hear on this call knows that I'm a physical therapist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I call this the WebMD effect. And so, you know, what oftentimes happens is somebody will come in and they've sought education on the internet in many different places to figure out what's going on with them. And they come in diagnosing themselves with whatever the problem is. And I've spent 26 years now, you know, developing and honing my craft as a physical therapist. I'm a very good diagnostician. And that's what you're paying me for when you're coming in, right? All of you, everyone on this call has got expertise that far outweighs and what's out there on the interwebs, right? It's not because you know more than the internet does. It's because you know how to filter it. You know how to digest it and hand it to the customer that walks in to make them a better educated person. Because oftentimes, although there's great information out there, there's zero filter, and people don't know how to digest that information. So consumer direct, I think it's got some good potential. I think there are ways that our industry can actually really benefit from some of that if we pivot and we adapt. But what your role ends up becoming is the gatekeeper for information. You're educators, right? You're advocates for this. And if people really want to know what the inside scoop is on the new bike they want, the new equipment they want, you can read reviews. And some of those people are educated and some of them are off the wall, right? But you guys, it's your profession. You've invested in understanding the equipment, especially the stuff that's in your shop, and people should be seeking you out for that information. And when you can add that value and customers know it, and you can show, to your point, that you care about them and you care about their experience riding the bike, not just selling them a bike, that it makes all the difference in the world, right? So whether you're fulfilling bikes, whether you're selling them out of your shop, whether somebody's bringing in a bike they bought in Walmart that we all just inside cringe on a little bit, right? you have the opportunity to provide that education, to show the value proposition in walking into your shop. And this is what it's about. It's not just about fitting bikes or the numbers you get to at the end of a bike fit. That's the last thing in the line of benefit, right? The benefit is making a smarter cyclist, a more educated consumer, and somebody who's going to enjoy riding their bike more.
This has been an awesome conversation, and I see more things in the chat, the appropriate charge per hour for an expert fitter. I hate to do this, but it is 2 and it's after 2, and I know some of us have commitments that we need to run to. So I can connect Greg with Phil for an answer on that question. And
please do reach out to me directly.
I want to just thank you, Ted, so much for coming and sharing and your knowledge. And I think next week we have a couple great topics, or not next week, next month, we have a couple great topics here that we can really dive into and really turn it into a roundtable discussion about some of the things we were just chatting on. So Greg, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us.
It was a lot of fun. And I learned from Greg every time I listen. If you listen to him, he's got something to tell me, so I really enjoy it. And the rest of the questions from all the other good dealers, you can't help but pick little ups. Oh yeah, look at that, look at that, look at that. But it's all good. I really like it.
Ted, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and I'll make an email to connect Greg and Phil. Thank you.
So long.